It was a quiet night in Lagro, Indiana. The air was crisp, the streets empty, the kind of night where nothing seemed out of place. But inside a modest home on the outskirts of town, a man lay dying. His body sprawled on the wooden floor, his breath shallow, his blood seeping into the floorboards beneath him. He had been shot, not once, not twice, but 6 times. There was no struggle, no sign of forced entry, no desperate attempt to flee. It was as if he had expected this, as if he had seen this moment coming long before it arrived. And as the life drained from him, he managed to speak just a few final words, words that would echo long after he was gone, words that turned a simple shooting into one of the most debated cases in the town's history. She finally did it. This has been going on for over a decade. 2 years ago, she tried and failed. Tonight, she succeeded. What did he mean? Who was she? And why would a man on the brink of death use his final breath to make an accusation that pointed to a plan, one that had been in motion for years? This was not a random act of violence. This was something far more complex. A friendship that had turned into something else entirely. A history of tension that had been overlooked for too long. And at the center of it all, William Carter and Lillian Hayes. William Carter wasn't just any man in Lagro. He was known and respected, a figure of authority. He was the principal of the local high school and the head basketball coach. He was a man who had dedicated his life to his students and his community. He had built a career, a reputation, a future. And just months before his death, he had gotten engaged. His life was on the verge of something new, something promising. But there was something else in his past. A friendship with Lillian Hayes that stretched back years. To most, Lillian was nothing more than an old friend, someone he had known for over a decade. But to those who paid attention, to those who listened closely, there were signs that the relationship was far more complicated than it seemed. On the night of November 12, 1938, William Carter went to Lillian's home for what should have been a simple evening of conversation and drinks. He was comfortable there. This was someone he had known for years. But by the time the night was over, he was on the floor, barely alive, 6 bullets tearing through his body. At first, Lillian told police a story that seemed impossible. She claimed William had shot himself, but that didn't make sense. He had been shot in the back. He had been shot in the groin. And most of all, William had only one arm. He could not have done this to himself. When confronted with the inconsistencies, Lillian changed her story. She then said she had been trying to take the gun away from him, that it had fired by accident. But that story had its own problems. 6 bullets, precise shots. A doctor who would later testify that William had still been coherent enough to make a deliberate, final statement. A statement that made one thing clear. This was no accident. In this documentary, we intend to break down the events of that night. We intend to examine William Carter's life, his final words, and the investigation that followed. We intend to look into Lillian Hayes, who she was, her connection to William, and why some believe this was a crime that had been planned for years. This story is not just about what happened inside that house. It is about what led to that moment, about the warning signs that were ignored, the conversations that hinted at a deeper truth, and ultimately, the question that lingers to this day. Did Lillian Hayes get away with murder? Everyone has a past, a relationship that lingers, a friendship that isn't quite what it appears to be. Some connections are harmless, others become destructive, and in some cases, they turn deadly. William Carter sensed it. He told those closest to him that Lillian wouldn't take his engagement well. He feared she would react badly. He worried about what she might do. And on November 12, 1938, he was right. Was this a crime of passion? A moment of heated emotion that spiraled out of control? Or had Lillian Hayes been waiting for this moment, biding her time, knowing that eventually, when the timing was right, she would pull the trigger? The town was left with questions. The family was left without answers, and a man's final words were left hanging in the air, pointing to a truth no one could ever fully prove. What really happened that night? The case of William Carter isn't just about a single night. It's about the years leading up to it. It's about a friendship with undercurrents of something more. It's about warnings that went ignored, red flags that were waved away, and a town that would forever wonder whether justice was truly served. As we delve into mystery together, we will step back in time for a moment. We will look at William Carter's life, who he was, what he meant to the town of Lagro, and what his closest friends saw in the days leading up to his death. We will uncover the history between him and Lillian Hayes, how they met, how their connection evolved, and why, for over a decade, something had been building between them. And then, we will return to that night, to the moments before the shots rang out, to the way the room must have felt when the gun was raised, to the final seconds before a man's fate was sealed. Was this an accident, a struggle, or a plan coming to fruition? The answers lie in the details, and tonight, we will uncover them all. Welcome to True Crime Chronicle, where we serve you with true crime stories that keep you at the edge of your seat and wonder the kinds of evil that lurks within the heart of men. Please hit the subscribe button and let's ride into mystery together. To most of the town, William Carter was a man with purpose. He carried himself with confidence, the way someone does when they are admired. He was a leader, a mentor, the kind of man parents trusted with their children's future. As the principal of Lagro High School and head basketball coach, he wasn't just an educator, he was a pillar of the community. He had built a life on discipline and structure, values he carried from his youth. He had one arm, the result of a childhood accident, but it never slowed him down. If anything, it made him more determined. He didn't make excuses. He didn't allow pity. He was respected not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. And just weeks before his death, William was preparing for something new. He was engaged. The next chapter of his life was unfolding, and for the first time in years, he was looking forward to a future outside the walls of his school, outside of the routines he had built for himself. But someone wasn't ready to let him go. The town of Lagro had seen William Carter as a man of integrity, a leader with a promising future. But there was another side of his life that few paid attention to, a friendship, one that stretched back over a decade, a connection that wasn't questioned because it had always been there, a presence in his life that people assumed was harmless. Then there is Lillian Hayes. She had been there for years, always in the background. A friend, some would say, a confidant. But for those who listened closely, for those who paid attention to the small things, the hesitation in William's voice when she came up in conversation, the way his expression would change when her name was mentioned, there was something beneath the surface, something unspoken. No one questioned why she was in his life. No one asked why she seemed so invested in his affairs. But there was one person who did notice, his fiancée. And in the days leading up to his death, William confided in her something he had never fully admitted before. He was afraid. He didn't fear for his career. He didn't fear for his reputation. He feared what would happen when Lillian found out he was engaged. He feared her reaction. He had seen glimpses of it before, enough to make him uneasy, enough to make him wonder what she was truly capable of. And then, just as he predicted, she found out. In the weeks before his murder, William's fiancée would later recall conversations that now haunt her, subtle comments, quiet admissions, moments where he seemed less sure of himself, where his usual confidence wavered. She won't take this well. She's not happy about the engagement. I don't know what she's going to do. At the time, they felt like words of concern, not fear, a worry about an uncomfortable conversation, not a life-threatening one. But looking back, they were warnings. Warnings that no one, not his fiancée, not his closest friends, realized were more serious than they had ever imagined. Because just days later, William Carter walked into Lillian Hayes' home, and he never walked out alive. Lillian Hayes was known in town. She was familiar. She and her husband had been part of the community for years. There was nothing particularly unusual about her, nothing that would have made people look twice. But there was something about the way she was connected to William. Something that, after his death, became impossible to ignore. She had been in his life for more than 10 years. Through different relationships, through changes in his career, through every major milestone, and yet no one could explain why. No one could pinpoint what held them together. When William got engaged, Lillian reacted. Subtly, at first. Small changes. Her demeanor toward him shifted. Her visits became more frequent. Her tone became sharper. Was it jealousy? Was it something more? Or had she already made up her mind about what needed to be done? On the evening of November 12, 1938, William Carter stepped out of his house for what should have been an ordinary night. He had plans. He was meeting friends. He was doing what he always did. But somewhere in those hours, he ended up at Lillian Hayes' home. Why? Was he invited? Did he go willingly? Did he believe it would be a normal visit? Or had he gone there knowing, deep down, that something wasn't right? We may never know. But what we do know is this. By the time the night was over, William Carter was on the floor, 6 bullets in his body, whispering his final words to a doctor who would never forget them. And the woman standing in the room with him, the only other person there when the shots were fired, was Lillian Hayes. We now know who William Carter was. The man Lagro respected. The man who had built a future only to have it stolen from him. We know about his past, the warnings he gave, the fear he expressed, the uneasy history with Lillian Hayes that had lingered for over a decade. But what we don't know, at least not yet, is what exactly happened inside that house. In the next chapter, we will break down the final hours of William Carter's life, the gun that appeared, the shifting stories, the doctor's testimony that changed everything. We will hear Lillian Hayes' version of events, the contradictions, the unraveling of her explanations, and we will return to the most damning evidence of all, William Carter's final words. A confession from beyond the grave. A warning that had come too late. The truth, waiting to be uncovered. November 12, 1938. The sun had set over the small town of Lagro. The streets were quiet. Homes were filled with the soft hum of radios, the distant echoes of families settling in for the night. But inside one house, at the edge of town, the night was far from ordinary. William Carter walked into Lillian Hayes' home sometime that evening. He was expected. This wasn't unusual. He had been there before, many times over the years, but tonight was different. Tonight, he had come not as a longtime friend, but as a man preparing to leave a piece of his past behind. A man whose future was no longer tied to Lillian Hayes. A man who was engaged to someone else. He had come for a conversation. He never left. What was said inside that house? What words were exchanged in the final moments before everything changed? We know there were drinks, glasses half filled, placed on the table. A slow burn in the fireplace, the flicker of shadows along the walls. A familiar setting. One where William had likely felt at ease, until he didn't. No one else was there to witness it. No one but Lillian. Did she bring up his engagement? Did she press him for details? Did she tell him what she had been feeling? Her fears, her anger, her resentment? Or did William sense it first? The shift in tone, the weight of something unspoken settling in the air. Did he realize, too late, that he should have never come? And then, the moment everything turned. A gun. How did it get there? Who reached for it first? Lillian's first story, one of many to follow, was that William had brought it with him. That he had taken it out, waving it carelessly, threatening to hurt himself. But that story had a problem. William Carter wasn't a man prone to recklessness. He was disciplined, measured, and, most importantly, those closest to him had never known him to carry a gun. Why would he bring one that night? And why, if he had been the one holding it, did he end up with 6 bullets in his body? The first gunshot shattered the silence. What happened in those first seconds is lost to time. Did William flinch, stepping backward? Did he raise his hand, his only hand, in an attempt to stop what was coming? The bullet tore into him. But it didn't stop there. Another shot, then another. One in his back, another in his groin. More, one after the other, until he collapsed. Until the fight, if there had been one, was over. The sound of gunfire echoed in the house. Then silence. A long silence. Lillian Hayes stood over his body. She must have seen the blood spreading beneath him. Must have seen his chest rise and fall, slower each time. And then, she had a choice to make. The first officers on the scene later recalled that when they arrived, Lillian was distressed, but not panicked. Emotional, but not inconsolable. And she had an explanation ready. He did it to himself, she said. But as the officers looked down at William Carter, at the placement of the wounds, at the sheer impossibility of the act, her words began to crumble. Despite his wounds, William was still alive when help arrived. He shouldn't have been. 6 bullets, blood loss, trauma. But somehow, he held on. He was rushed to the hospital, doctors working desperately to keep him stable. It was there, in the final moments before his body could fight no more, that he gave his last statement. He didn't name her outright. He didn't need to. His words told the story for him. She finally did it. This has been going on for over a decade. 2 years ago, she tried and failed. Tonight, she succeeded. It was an accusation spoken from the edge of death, a revelation no jury would ever hear firsthand. But it was enough to change the entire course of the case. When investigators presented Lillian with the doctor's testimony, her story changed. "I tried to take the gun away from him," she said. Now, instead of suicide, it was an accident. A struggle gone wrong. A desperate attempt to stop William from harming himself. But that story had its own problems. If it had been a struggle, why was William shot in the back? If she had been trying to save him, why were there 6 shots, 2 of them in places that suggested anything but self-defense? And if she had truly been afraid for him, why hadn't she called for help sooner? By morning, the story had spread through Lagro. William Carter, coach, principal, friend, was dead. The town was divided. Some believed Lillian, that this had been an accident, a tragic end to a long and complicated friendship. Others whispered that William had known this was coming, that he had tried to warn those around him, that the engagement had been the tipping point, the final break in a history of emotions that had festered beneath the surface for years. But the only people who truly knew what had happened inside that house were William and Lillian. And one of them was no longer alive to tell the truth. What really happened on the night of November 12, 1938? We now know the sequence of events. A visit, a gun, a shooting that left a man bleeding on the floor. We have the stories, Lillian's shifting explanations, William's final words. But what we don't have yet is justice. In the next chapter, we step into the courtroom. We listen to the arguments, the evidence, the trial that would decide Lillian Hayes' fate. And we uncover the final, lasting question, the one that lingers decades after the case was closed. Did Lillian Hayes get away with murder? The night of November 12, 1938, had ended in blood. But for the investigators assigned to the case, the real work was just beginning. William Carter was dead. The woman standing over his body had admitted to being there when the shots were fired. But beyond that, nothing added up. There was no sign of a break-in, no evidence of a third person in the house, and Lillian Hayes' first explanation, that William had shot himself, wasn't just unlikely. It was impossible. They needed answers. And with every question they asked, Lillian's story changed. William Carter had been shot 6 times. The wounds were precise and intentional. One bullet had torn through his back, another had struck his groin. The others, carefully placed. A single self-inflicted shot would have been difficult, given that he had only one arm. But 6? Impossible. The investigators reviewing the autopsy report knew one thing. This was no accident. And this was no suicide. Lillian Hayes' second version of events had been different from the first. Now she wasn't saying William had shot himself. Now she was saying they had struggled for the gun. That, in the midst of chaos, it had gone off. But investigators had more questions. If there had been a struggle, why wasn't there evidence of it? The room wasn't disturbed. There were no overturned chairs, no broken glass, no marks on her body. And what about the 6 gunshots? How does a gun accidentally fire 6 times? With every question, the gap between Lillian's story and the evidence grew wider. And then investigators uncovered something they hadn't expected. A doctor, a witness to William Carter's final words. Dr. Richard Sullivan had been the physician on call the night William Carter was brought to the hospital. He had done everything he could to keep him alive, but the damage was too severe. And as William Carter slipped closer to death, he spoke. His words were quiet, strained, but clear, and they revealed something investigators had suspected all along. She finally did it. This has been going on for over a decade. 2 years ago, she tried and failed. Tonight, she succeeded. With those words, the investigation shifted. William had named his killer. The only question now was, would a jury believe him? Now, the case was taken to court, and on that fateful day, it was packed full. People from all over Lagro filled the seats, eager to hear the case against Lillian Hayes. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had waited years for this moment. They argued that William's engagement had been the breaking point, that she had lured him to her home, that she had pulled the trigger again and again, until she was sure he would never leave her. But the defense had a different story. They claimed William had been drinking, that he had been emotional, that Lillian had simply been trying to protect him when the gun went off. An accident, a moment of confusion, a situation that had gotten out of hand. 2 stories, one man's final words, and a jury that had to decide what was truth and what was a lie. After days of testimony, of photographs, of heated arguments between the prosecution and defense, the jury was sent to deliberate. Hours passed, and then they returned. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Guilty, but not of murder. Manslaughter. Lillian Hayes was sentenced to 2 to 21 years in prison. Some gasped, others shook their heads. William Carter had been shot 6 times. He had told a doctor with his dying breath that Lillian had done this on purpose, and yet she would serve the minimum sentence. 2 years, that's all. For William Carter's family, it wasn't justice. They had lost a son, a brother, a friend. And in return, Lillian Hayes had lost only 2 years of her life. 2 years behind bars. And then she would walk free. Some in town whispered that she had won, that she had done what she set out to do and barely paid the price. Others said she had been punished enough, that it was a tragic accident, just as she claimed. But there was one thing no one could deny. William Carter had known this would happen. He had seen it coming, and in his final moments, he had tried to tell the world. But it hadn't been enough. Now, the trial is over. The courtroom had emptied. Lillian Hayes had been sentenced. But even as she served her time, even as the years passed, questions remained. Had she truly planned this? Had William's engagement been the final trigger? Or was there something even deeper in their past that no one had uncovered? And the biggest question of all, did Lillian Hayes get away with murder? For 2 years, Lillian Hayes sat behind bars. 2 years for the life of a man who had been shot 6 times. 2 years for the final words that had named her as his killer. 2 years for a crime that, to many, should have been called something else entirely. Murder. But 2 years was all she served, and then, just as easily as she had vanished from the world, she was released. The gates opened. The town watched, and Lillian Hayes walked free. The town of Lagro had changed. People still whispered her name, but no one spoke to her. Some saw her as a woman who had made a terrible mistake and paid for it. Others saw her as someone who had cheated the system, who had gotten away with something much worse than what the court had declared. Justice had been served, the judge had said. But if you asked the people of Lagro, they weren't so sure. Some say she tried to return to a normal life, but nothing was ever normal again. Her name would forever be tied to William Carter's, and the words he had spoken in his final moments would forever hang over her. Words that she would never be able to erase. There is a place in Lagro where William Carter's name still lingers, where the past is never forgotten. His grave. A simple headstone, nothing extravagant, but those who visit know the weight it carries. A reminder of a case that left more questions than answers. A man who had seen his own death coming, and a woman who had walked away after 2 short years. Family and friends continued to visit. Some came with flowers, others came with anger, and some came simply to ask the question that had never been answered. Why? There are those who say Lillian Hayes knew exactly what she was doing that night, that she had been waiting, that William's engagement had been the breaking point, that she had invited him over, knowing full well how the night would end, that the gun had always been meant for him, and that once the act was done, she had simply told the best story she could, a story that, in the end, had been enough to spare her life. But others say it was never meant to happen, that Lillian had loved William in her own way, that it had been a night of high emotion, words exchanged that could never be taken back, that when the gun was fired, it wasn't part of a plan, it was part of a moment she hadn't seen coming, and when the realization hit her, she did what anyone might do. She lied, because it was the only way she knew to save herself. Years passed. New stories took over the town. But the name William Carter never truly faded. His students still remembered him. The people of Lagro still spoke of him in hushed tones. And those who had been in the courtroom that day never forgot the moment the verdict was read. Guilty, but only of manslaughter. A life taken, a confession given, but justice that had never quite felt complete. What makes a person snap? Was this crime committed out of love? Out of rage? Out of something that had been waiting to surface for years? We may never know. Lillian Hayes never spoke of it again, and William Carter's final words, his last chance to tell the world what had happened, were not enough to change the course of history. And so, the question lingers. Did Lillian Hayes get away with murder? And this story is more than just a crime. It is a reminder that not all cases are as simple as they seem, that truth can be blurred, that the legal system does not always deliver what feels right, and that sometimes, even when a person is named as a killer, they still walk free. William Carter feared this moment. He saw it coming, and yet no one was able to stop it. The law did what it could, but the truth may never fully be known. What do you think? Was justice served, or did Lillian Hayes get away with murder? Comment below and let us know. We'd like to hear from you. Please like and subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten true crime cases. This is True Crime Chronicle, where we serve you true crime stories that bring awareness to the happenings around our world. Until we meet again next time, stay out of crime.